Mafia Korean boss saw the nurse slapped his pregnant black wife. What he did will leave you shocked. The slap echoed through the sterile room like a gunshot. Elena Brooks couldn't breathe. Her cheek burned, her vision blurred with tears, and the contraction that had been building for the last 3 minutes suddenly felt like nothing compared to the shock radiating through her body. She stared at the woman standing over her bed, the woman who was supposed to help her bring her child into the world, and saw nothing but cold hatred in those eyes. "Stop being dramatic," Nurse Co. Mireille said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. You're not special." Elena's hand trembled as she touched her face. The room spun. Another contraction was coming. She could feel it building like a wave about to crash. But all she could think about was the fact that this woman had just hit her. Hit her. While she was in labor. While she was alone and helpless and trying to bring a life into this world. "Please," Elena whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I just need." "You need to be quiet," Mireille interrupted, turning away to adjust something on the monitor with deliberate slowness. "Your husband's money doesn't buy you the right to disturb everyone on this floor." The words cut deeper than the slap. Elena had heard whispers before, seen the looks from some of the staff when Jean brought her to Blue Crown Medical Center 3 days ago for monitoring. She was foreign, black, married to a man whose name carried weight and fear in equal measure throughout Hanul City. Some people bowed to her. Others looked at her like she was a stain on something pure. The contraction hit, and Elena cried out, clutching the bed rails. Mireille didn't move. Outside the window, rain hammered against the glass. The storm had been raging for hours, turning the night into something dark and hostile. The VIP maternity wing was on the 7th floor, isolated from the rest of the hospital, designed for privacy and discretion. Right now, that privacy felt like a prison. Elena's phone sat on the side table, screen black. Dead. She'd been trying to call Jean for the past 2 hours, watching the battery drain with each failed attempt. Each call that went to voicemail. He'd promised to be here. He'd promised. But something had come up, something urgent with the business, and he'd kissed her forehead and told her he'd be back before anything happened. He'd been wrong. "Water," Elena gasped when the contraction finally released its grip. "Please, can I have water?" Mireille looked at her with something like disgust. "You can wait. I have other patients who actually need me." "There's no one else on this floor," Elena said, her voice stronger now despite the pain. "I heard the staff talking. The other rooms are empty tonight." Mireille's jaw tightened. For a moment, something dangerous flashed across her face. Something that made Elena's survival instincts scream a warning. But then the nurse smiled, cold and sharp. "Then I suppose you'll have plenty of time to think about how lucky you are," Mireille said softly. "To have everything you have. To take what doesn't belong to you." Before Elena could respond, before she could even process what that meant, Mireille walked out of the room, letting the door swing shut with a hollow click. The lock engaged with a sound that made Elena's heart stop. She was locked in. Elena stared at the door, her mind refusing to accept what was happening. This couldn't be real. This was a hospital. An expensive, prestigious hospital that Jean had chosen specifically because it was supposed to be the best. People didn't lock laboring women in rooms. Nurses didn't hit their patients. This wasn't happening. Another contraction built, and this time Elena screamed. She screamed for help, for anyone, for her husband. But the only answer was the thunder outside and the cold silence of the empty corridor beyond her door. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Across the city, in a warehouse that smelled of salt water and motor oil, Jean Sukhan sat at a metal table with 3 men who wanted to kill him. They didn't show it, of course. They smiled and bowed and offered him expensive whiskey that he didn't touch. But Jean had been in this business long enough to read the truth in the tightness around their eyes. The way their hands stayed close to their jackets. The almost imperceptible nod the leader gave to the man by the door. "We appreciate you coming personally," Kim Jae-sung said, sliding a contract across the table. Given the delicate nature of this arrangement, Jin didn't look at the contract. He kept his eyes on Jae-sung, watching the older man's face for any tell, any hint of the betrayal Jin's sources had warned him about. This meeting was supposed to finalize a shipping agreement that would move their operation into legitimate territory, but the intelligence he'd received 3 hours ago suggested Jae-sung was planning to eliminate him and absorb his network. "The nature is only delicate if one of us plans to break our word," Jin said quietly. Jae-sung's smile didn't waver. "Of course, we are men of honor." Jin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. He'd been ignoring it for the past hour because showing weakness here, showing any distraction, would be an invitation to violence. Elena would understand. She always understood. This meeting was important. It was supposed to secure their future, make sure their child grew up in a world where Jin could step back from the darkness he'd lived in for so long. The phone buzzed again, and again. Jae-sung's eyes flicked to Jin's pocket. "Do you need to take that?" "No," Jin said and picked up a pen. He was signing his name when the door burst open. Park Dong-min, Jin's head of security, stood in the doorway with blood on his knuckles and murder in his eyes. The 3 guards who'd been stationed outside were nowhere to be seen. Jae-sung's men reached for their weapons, but froze when Dong-min raised his hand, showing he was unarmed. "Sir," Dong-min said, breathing hard, "it's your wife." Everything else disappeared. The contract, the threat, the carefully maintained facade of control. Jin was on his feet before Dong-min finished speaking. "What happened?" "She's been trying to reach you. The hospital called my number when yours didn't answer. There's a problem." Jin didn't ask permission, didn't apologize, didn't explain. He simply walked past Dong-min, past the shocked faces of Jae-sung and his men, out into the rain-soaked night where his car was already running. "Drive," he told his driver. "Blue Crown. Now." The city blurred past the windows. Jin tried Elena's phone 6 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. He called the hospital's main line and was transferred 3 times before reaching someone who would talk to him. "Mr. Jin, your wife is in active labor," a nervous administrator said. "She's been asking for you. I'm 10 minutes away. Who's attending to her?" A pause. "The head nurse on the VIP floor. Nurse Seo. I want a doctor with her. Now." "Sir, Nurse Seo is very experienced." "I didn't ask about her experience," Jin said, his voice dropping to the tone that made men with guns reconsider their life choices. "I want a doctor with my wife in the next 5 minutes, or I want to know why that's not possible." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll personally check on her, sir." The line went dead. Jin stared at his phone, at the missed calls from Elena's number, at the timestamps showing she'd been trying to reach him for hours. Guilt twisted in his chest, cold and sharp. He'd promised her, promised he'd be there, promised she wouldn't have to do this alone. The car skidded to a stop in front of Blue Crown Medical Center. Jin was out before it fully stopped, striding through the rain toward the entrance. The security guard at the door took one look at his face and stepped aside without asking for identification. The elevator ride to the 7th floor took 30 seconds. Felt like 30 hours. The VIP maternity wing was silent when the doors opened. Too silent. Jin had been here before when they'd toured the facility. He remembered soft music, gentle voices, the occasional cry of a newborn. Now there was nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the whisper of his own footsteps on the polished floor. Elena's room was at the end of the corridor. Jin could see the door from the elevator, see the light spilling out from underneath. He walked toward it, his heart pounding in a way it never did during negotiations or threats or violence. He opened the door and stopped breathing. Elena was curled on her side in the hospital bed, her face buried in the pillow, her body shaking. One hand clutched her swollen belly. The other was pressed against her cheek, and even from the doorway Jean could see the redness there, the swelling that meant someone had struck her. "Elena," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She looked up, and the relief in her eyes was immediately replaced by something worse. Shame. As if she was embarrassed to be seen like this, as if any of this was her fault. "Jean," she whispered. "You came." He was across the room in 3 strides, kneeling beside the bed, his hands hovering over her face because he wanted to touch her but was afraid of causing more pain. "Who did this?" "I'm okay," she said, trying to smile. "The baby's okay. Elena, who touched you?" She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek, following the curve of the swelling. "The nurse, Mireille. She got angry when I asked for help. She said I was being dramatic. And when I tried to call you again, she took my phone and it fell and—" Elena's words cut off as another contraction seized her. Jean watched helplessly as pain transformed her face, as she gripped his hand hard enough to bruise. He counted the seconds. 45. 45 seconds where the woman he loved was in agony and there was nothing he could do except be there, which was the one thing he'd failed at tonight. When the contraction passed, Elena sagged against the pillows, exhausted. "I'm sorry," she breathed. "I know you had important—" "Stop," Jean said gently. He touched her face, carefully avoiding the bruise. "Nothing is more important than you. Nothing. Do you understand me?" She nodded, but he could see she didn't really believe it. How could she, when he'd left her alone for this? Jean stood and walked to the door, opened it. The corridor was still empty, but he could hear voices now, nervous whispers coming from the nurse's station around the corner. He stepped out into the hall. "I need the head nurse," he called out, his voice carrying like a blade. "Sio Mireille. I need her here now." The whispers stopped. Jean waited, counting his own heartbeats, feeling the cold rage in his chest settle into something calculated and precise. This wasn't the hot anger of the moment. This was the fury of a man who'd built an empire on knowing exactly how to make people regret their mistakes. Footsteps approached. A woman in scrubs appeared, mid-40s, with tired eyes and a professional smile that wavered when she saw his face. "Mr. Jean, I'm Nurse Sio. I've been caring for your wife." "You hit her," Jean said quietly. The smile disappeared. "I'm sorry, what?" "You struck my wife. While she was in labor. While she was alone and vulnerable and in pain." Mireille's face went pale, then flushed red. "Sir, I don't know what she told you, but that's absolutely not. Are you calling her a liar?" The question hung in the air like a noose. Mireille opened her mouth, closed it, seemed to be calculating her odds. Around the corner, Jean could hear more footsteps, more people gathering but not daring to show themselves. "Your wife has been very emotional," Mireille said carefully. "The pain of labor can sometimes cause confusion. I may have been firm with her when she became hysterical, but I would never." "Show me your hands," Jean said. "Excuse me, your hands. Show them to me." Mireille hesitated, then held out her hands, palms up. Jean looked at them, at the slight redness across the right palm, the kind of mark that came from striking something. "The bruise on my wife's face," Jean said, still in that same quiet voice. "It matches the size of your hand. Would you like me to call the police to verify that? Or would you prefer to be honest with me now?" Mireille's composure cracked. "Do you have any idea what people like you have done?" she hissed. "What your business has destroyed. My husband lost everything because of you. His job, his dignity, everything. And she gets to walk around dripping in jewelry, living in luxury, acting like she's better than everyone. So you hit her," Jean finished. "You hit a pregnant woman in active labor because you blame me for your husband's failures." "He didn't fail," Mireille snapped. "You ruined him. You people ruin everything you touch, and then you expect the rest of us to bow and smile and be grateful for scraps. If you're enjoying the story so far, hit the like button and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Gene studied her for a long moment. He could see it now, the grief and rage that had festered into something poisonous. He'd seen it before in other people who'd been caught in the wake of his world. Some of them had legitimate grievances. His business, even the legitimate parts of it, sometimes crushed people who got in the way. But none of that gave her the right to hurt Elena. Call security, Gene said, not taking his eyes off Mireille. And call the hospital administrator. Also call the police. The color drained from Mireille's face. You can't. I can, Gene said softly. And I will. You assaulted a patient. In a hospital. While she was in labor. There will be security footage. There will be an investigation. And if I find out that anyone else on the staff knew what you were doing and did nothing, they will face consequences too. You think your money can? This has nothing to do with money, Gene interrupted. This has to do with the fact that you violated every oath you took as a nurse. You became the thing you claim to hate. And now you'll face the consequences of that choice. 2 security guards appeared from around the corner, summoned by someone Gene hadn't seen. Behind them came a man in a white coat, the hospital administrator Gene had spoken to on the phone, looking like he was watching his career implode in real time. Mr. Gene, the administrator began. I assure you, I need a doctor with my wife immediately, Gene said, cutting through the platitudes. I need someone who will actually care for her, and I need this woman removed from the premises while we wait for the police. Mireille started to speak, but Gene held up a hand. Save it for your statement. Tell them about your husband. Tell them about your anger. Maybe they'll have sympathy. But if you ever come near my wife again, sympathy won't help you. The security guards took Mireille by the arms. She didn't resist, but the look she gave Gene was pure hatred, the kind that didn't fade with time or distance. Gene watched her go and felt nothing. He'd seen that look before. It didn't frighten him. Nothing frightened him except the thought of losing Elena or their child. Sir, the administrator said, wringing his hands, I am deeply, deeply sorry. This is unprecedented. We will of course cover all medical costs, and if there's anything else. I want a full investigation, Gene said. I want to know how long this woman has been abusing patients. I want to know who knew about it. And I want systemic changes to make sure it never happens again. Of course, absolutely. And I want a new nurse, someone gentle, someone who still remembers why they chose this profession. The administrator nodded frantically and hurried away, already pulling out his phone. Gene stood alone in the corridor for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade, letting himself feel the guilt that had been building since Dongmin burst into that warehouse. He should have been here, should have answered his phone, should have prioritized the woman he loved over a business deal that probably would have ended in violence anyway. He'd spent so many years learning to be hard, to be calculating, to put business first, that he'd almost forgotten the most important thing. None of it mattered if he lost her. Gene walked back into Elena's room. She was sitting up now, one hand on her belly, watching the door with wide eyes. Is she gone? Elena asked. She's gone. She won't bother you again. Gene, you didn't have to. Yes, he said firmly, returning to kneel beside her bed. I did, and I should have done it hours ago. I should have been here. Elena reached out and touched his face, her fingers gentle. You're here now. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it with every part of himself. I'm so sorry, Elena. You tried to call me and I ignored it because I thought a business deal was more important. I left you alone when you needed me most. You didn't know, she said softly. How could you have known? I should have trusted my instincts. I had a bad feeling about leaving you here, but I ignored it. I won't do that again. Another contraction came, and this time Jean was ready. He held Elena's hand, counted through the pain with her, whispered encouragement and love in both English and Korean. When it passed, she looked at him with exhausted eyes. "I was so scared," she admitted. "Not just of the pain, but of her. The way she looked at me, like I was something disgusting, like I didn't deserve to be here." "You deserve everything," Jean said fiercely. "Everything good in this world. And anyone who makes you feel otherwise will answer to me." "That's very Mafia Boss of you," Elena said with a weak smile. "Good. Let them remember who they're dealing with." There was a soft knock on the door. A woman in scrubs entered, older than Mireille, with silver hair and kind eyes that immediately went to Elena. "I'm Nurse Han Soo-yun," she said gently. "I'll be taking care of you from now on. First, let me say I'm sorry. What happened to you was wrong, and it never should have occurred. You have my word that I will do everything in my power to make sure the rest of your experience here is what it should have been from the start." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." Soo-yun moved around the room with quiet efficiency, checking monitors, adjusting Elena's position, explaining everything she was doing in a soft voice that somehow made the clinical space feel warmer. She brought water without being asked. She held Elena's hand during the next contraction and coached her through the breathing. "You're doing beautifully," Soo-yun said. "Your baby will be here soon. I can tell she's eager to meet her parents." "She?" Elena asked. Soo-yun smiled. "Call it intuition. I've been doing this for 30 years. I'm usually right." Over the next 2 hours, the storm outside began to fade. The contractions grew closer together, more intense. Soo-yun never left the room. Neither did Jean. He stood beside Elena, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement, being the anchor she needed. Between contractions, they talked about names they'd chosen, about the nursery Jean had been secretly decorating with help from Elena's mother, about their fears and hopes and the strange, terrifying, beautiful thing they were about to become together. "I never thought I'd have this," Elena said during a quiet moment. "A family. Someone who would fight for me the way you did tonight." "You'll always have me," Jean promised. "And our daughter will grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she's protected, knowing that her mother is the strongest person I've ever met." "I don't feel strong right now." "You're bringing life into the world," Jean said. "There's nothing stronger than that." A doctor arrived, checked Elena's progress, and nodded with satisfaction. "It's time," she said. "Are you ready?" Elena looked at Jean, and he saw the fear there, the exhaustion, but also the determination. She squeezed his hand. "Ready," she said. "We're halfway through this incredible story. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss the ending." The next 30 minutes were a blur of pain and effort and encouragement. Jean had faced down armed men, negotiated with killers, walked through situations where one wrong word meant death. None of it compared to watching Elena fight to bring their child into the world. He felt useless and awed in equal measure. Soo-yun was amazing, guiding Elena through each push, knowing exactly when to encourage and when to give her a moment to breathe. The doctor worked with calm efficiency, and Elena, his Elena, was a warrior. She screamed and cried and cursed and pushed through pain that Jean couldn't imagine. And when the doctor finally said, "One more, I can see the head," Elena gathered every bit of strength she had left and brought their daughter into the world. The baby's cry filled the room, and Jean felt something break open in his chest. The doctor placed the tiny, perfect creature on Elena's chest, and Elena sobbed, laughing and crying at the same time, her hands gentle as she touched their daughter's face. "Hi," Elena whispered. "Hi, baby. We've been waiting for you." Jean couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at the two most important people in his world and feel gratitude so overwhelming it brought him to his knees. He knelt beside the bed, one hand on Elena's shoulder, one finger gently stroking his daughter's impossibly tiny hand. "She's perfect," he managed to say. "You're both perfect." The baby wrapped her fingers around his, and Jean felt his heart complete a transformation that had started the moment he met Elena. All the violence, all the darkness, all the things he'd done to survive in his world, it all faded into background noise compared to this moment, to this love. Soo-yeon gave them time, quietly cleaning up, giving the new family space to bond. When she finally approached to take the baby for measurements and tests, she did it with such gentleness that Elena didn't even hesitate to hand over their daughter. "She's strong," Soo-yeon said as she worked. "Good lungs, good color, 7 pounds, 4 ounces, 19 inches, perfect in every way." She wrapped the baby in a soft blanket and returned her to Elena's arms. "What will you name her?" Elena looked at Jean and they both smiled. They'd had this conversation a dozen times, lying in bed late at night, imagining this moment. "Nari," Elena said softly. "It means lily in Korean, and her middle name will be Grace." "Nari Grace," Soo-yeon repeated, her eyes soft. "Beautiful. It suits her." Jean leaned down and kissed Elena's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "For her. For everything. For being brave enough to love me despite everything I am." "You make it easy," Elena said, looking up at him with tired, happy eyes. "Though tonight was a bit dramatic, even for us. I promise the rest of our life will be boring by comparison." "Liar," Elena said, but she was smiling. There was a knock on the door. The hospital administrator stood there, looking nervous. "Mr. Jean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the police are here. They need to take your statement about the incident." Jean looked at Elena. "Will you be okay if I step out for a few minutes?" "We'll be fine," Elena said, glancing at Soo-yeon, who nodded reassuringly. "Go. Make sure they understand exactly what happened." Jean stepped into the corridor where 2 police officers waited. One was young, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. The other was older, a detective with sharp eyes who'd probably seen everything. "Mr. Jean," the detective said, "I'm Detective Park. I understand there was an assault on your wife this evening." "Yes," Jean said, and proceeded to give a clear, factual account of everything Elena had told him, everything he'd witnessed, everything that had happened. He didn't exaggerate, didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. Detective Park took notes, his expression growing darker as Jean spoke. "And you believe this was motivated by a personal grudge against you?" The nurse admitted as much. "Her husband apparently lost his job, and she blamed me for it. She took that anger out on my wife." "Do you know the husband's name?" Jean did. He knew because he'd had his people look into Seo Mire the moment the administrator said her name. In his world, information was currency, and he always paid his debts. Seo Junho. He was terminated from a shipping company I have financial interests in. For embezzlement. Detective Park's eyebrows rose. "I see. So the husband's termination was legitimate. Completely. There was evidence. He was given the option to resign quietly or face prosecution. He chose resignation. But his wife blamed you anyway. People believe what they need to believe," Jean said quietly. "I understand anger at me. I've made choices in my life that have hurt people. But Elena had nothing to do with any of that. She was an innocent target for misplaced rage." Detective Park studied him for a long moment. "You're being very cooperative, Mr. Jean. Given your reputation, I expected this conversation to go differently." Jean met his eyes steadily. "My reputation is irrelevant. A crime was committed against my wife. I want justice, through the proper channels, legally. Is that so surprising? In my experience, men in your position often prefer to handle things privately." "I'm a father now," Jean said softly. "I want my daughter to grow up in a world where justice means something, where people can't abuse their power without consequences." If I handle this outside the law, I teach her that might makes right. I don't want that for her. Detective Park smiled slightly. Then we want the same thing. I'll make sure this is handled properly. The nurse will face charges. Assault at minimum. Possibly more depending on what else we find when we investigate her history. Good, Jean said. And detective? Thank you for taking this seriously. Every victim deserves to be taken seriously, Park said. Rich or poor, foreign or local, connected or not. That's the job. Jean returned to Elena's room to find her sleeping. Nari tucked safely in the bassinet beside the bed. Suyun was sitting in a chair by the window, knitting something small and blue. She just fell asleep, Suyun whispered. The baby too. Both exhausted, as they should be. Jean approached the bassinet and looked down at his daughter. She was so small, so impossibly fragile. How did people do this? How did they survive the terror of loving something so vulnerable? You'll learn, Suyun said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. It gets easier and harder. Parenthood is full of contradictions. How long have you been a nurse? Jean asked. 32 years. I've delivered more babies than I can count. Held more hands. Seen more miracles. Why do you still do it? Suyun looked at him over her knitting. Because moments like this matter. Because bringing new life into the world is holy work, even in the worst circumstances. Because sometimes I can make a difference. You made a difference tonight, Jean said. For Elena. For me. Thank you. You're welcome. Though I wish our meeting had been under better circumstances. She set down her knitting. Mr. Jean, can I speak honestly with you? Please. What happened tonight was wrong. Criminal. But it's also symptomatic of a larger problem. This hospital, like many hospitals, runs on hierarchy and fear. Staff are overworked. Complaints are ignored. People like Nurse CO are allowed to continue because they're efficient, because they've been here for years, because no one wants to rock the boat. That needs to change, Jean said. Yes, but change requires more than just punishing one bad actor. It requires systemic reform. Training, oversight, a culture where patients can report abuse without fear, where staff can speak up when they see something wrong. What are you asking me to do? Suyun smiled. I'm not asking. I'm just saying that you have resources and influence. If you wanted to make a real difference, to ensure what happened to your wife never happens to anyone else, you could. Jean looked at Elena sleeping peacefully, at Nari's tiny face. What would that look like? Fund an independent patient advocacy program. Require transparency in complaints. Mandatory training on cultural sensitivity and implicit bias. Regular audits. Anonymous reporting systems. Real consequences for abuse, not just for incidents involving powerful families. You've thought about this, Jean observed. I've been thinking about it for 32 years. Suyun said. Watching good people get hurt by a broken system. Tonight just made it more urgent. Jean nodded slowly. I'll look into it. I can't promise miracles, but I can promise to try. My daughter deserves to grow up in a world that's better than the one I knew. That's all any of us can do, Suyun said. Make it a little better for the next generation. This story is almost over, but before we continue, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your engagement truly matters. The sun rose over Hanul City, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and fresh. Jean stood at the window of Elena's room, watching the city wake up, feeling like he was seeing it for the first time. Behind him, Elena stirred. He turned to find her awake, looking at Nari with such love it made his chest tight. Morning, Elena said softly. How long have you been awake? A few hours. Couldn't sleep. Too much to think about. Like what? Jean came to sit beside her on the bed, careful not to jostle her. Like how we're going to keep our daughter safe in a world that can be so cruel. Like how I'm going to teach her to be strong without becoming hard. Like how to honor your strength while protecting your softness. That's a lot of thinking, Elena said with a small smile. I also thought about Nurse Seo, about her husband, about the fact that, in some way, what happened to her family might have been connected to my business. Elena's expression became serious. You're not responsible for other people's crimes, Jean. Her husband stole. He faced consequences. That's not your fault. I know. But it made me think about all the ways my choices ripple outward. All the people who get hurt in the wake of what I do. I've spent years telling myself that business is business, that I'm just playing the game everyone else plays. But tonight showed me what that really means. What are you saying? I'm saying I want to be different. For you. For Nari. I want to be the kind of man my daughter can be proud of, not the kind she has to explain away. Elena reached out and took his hand. You're already that man, Jean. You came for me tonight. You fought for me. You demanded justice instead of revenge. That's who you are. That's who I want to be, Jean corrected. But I have a long way to go. Nari made a small sound, and both parents immediately turned their attention to her. Elena lifted her gently, and Jean watched in amazement as his wife began to nurse their daughter with a natural grace that seemed impossible given everything she'd been through. She's hungry, Elena said with a tired laugh. Already demanding like her father. Smart like her mother, Jean countered. There was a knock on the door. The hospital administrator entered, looking much more composed than he had the night before, but still nervous. Mr. Jean, Mrs. Jean, I wanted to speak with you personally, he began. First, to apologize again for what happened, and second, to inform you of the steps we're taking. Go on, Jean said. Nurse Seo has been permanently terminated. The police have charged her with assault. We've also begun a full review of all incidents reported on the VIP floor for the past 5 years. If we find any pattern of abuse or misconduct, those responsible will be held accountable. That's a start, Jean said. But it's not enough. The administrator paled slightly. What else would you suggest? I want a complete overhaul of your patient protection policies. I want anonymous reporting systems. I want regular audits by outside agencies. I want every member of your staff trained in cultural sensitivity and patient advocacy. And I want a patient liaison position created. Someone whose only job is to ensure patients feel safe and heard. That's extensive, the administrator said. It's necessary, Jean replied. What happened to my wife could have happened to anyone. Someone less connected. Someone who couldn't fight back. Someone who had no voice. I want you to build a system that protects those people. And if we don't? Jean smiled coldly. Then I'll make sure every family in this city knows what happened here. I'll make sure they know that Blue Crown Medical Center allowed a nurse to assault a laboring patient. I'll make sure your reputation never recovers. But I'd rather work with you to make real change. The administrator swallowed hard. I'll begin implementing these changes immediately. You have my word. Good. I'll be checking. Jean said, I'll be sending my own people to audit your progress. This isn't about one incident anymore. It's about creating systemic change. After the administrator left, Elena looked at Jean with something like wonder. You're really going to do this? Push for reform. I am. Suyun was right. I have resources and influence. I should use them for something that matters. Who are you and what have you done with my morally ambiguous mafia husband? Elena teased gently. He became a father, Jean said seriously, and he realized that the world he was building wasn't one he wanted his daughter to inherit. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Nari sleep after her feeding. The morning sun filled the room with warm light. Outside the window, the city continued its daily rhythm, oblivious to the small miracle that had occurred in this room. Jean, Elena said softly, thank you. for everything you did last night, for believing me, for fighting for me. Always, he promised. I will always fight for you, both of you, even when it means fighting parts of myself. There was another knock, and Soo-yun entered with a wheelchair. I hate to interrupt, but if you're feeling up to it, Mrs. Jean, we should get you moved to a recovery room. This space will be more comfortable for the next few days while we monitor both you and little Nari. Elena nodded. Jean helped her into the wheelchair while Soo-yun carefully lifted Nari. They made a small procession down the corridor to a larger room with a window overlooking the city, a comfortable bed, and a proper nursery setup for the baby. Once Elena was settled, Soo-yun lingered. I wanted to tell you both something before my shift ends. What happened last night was a darkness in a place that should only know light. But the way you responded, Mr. Jean, the way you demanded justice without revenge, the way you're planning to create lasting change, that gives me hope. For this hospital, for our profession, for the patients who will come after your family. I'm just doing what should have been done a long time ago, Jean said. That's how change always starts, Soo-yun replied with a smile. Someone finally doing what should have been done all along. Take care of each other. Take care of that beautiful baby. And know that there are good people in this hospital who are grateful for what you're doing. After she left, Jean and Elena found themselves alone with their daughter for the first time since her birth. The weight of new parenthood settled over them like a blanket, heavy but warm. What do we do now? Elena asked, a hint of panic in her voice. How do we keep her safe? How do we teach her everything she needs to know? We do it one day at a time, Jean said, pulling a chair close to Elena's bed. We love her. We protect her. We show her through our actions what it means to be strong and kind and brave. That sounds exhausting, Elena said, but she was smiling. It probably will be, but we'll do it together. Nari stirred in her bassinet, making soft sounds. Jean reached down and carefully lifted her, still amazed by how tiny she was, how perfectly she fit in his arms. He walked to the window and looked out at the city. Do you see that? He said softly to his daughter. That's Hanul City. It's beautiful and broken, kind and cruel, full of people trying their best and people who've given up trying. It's complicated, but it's home. And your mother and I are going to do everything we can to make it better for you. Elena watched them from the bed, tears streaming down her face. I love you, she said. Both of you. So much. We love you too, Jean said, returning to her side. Our strong, brave, beautiful Elena. You brought life into this world last night. You survived something terrible. You're a warrior. I didn't feel like a warrior, Elena admitted. I felt scared and alone. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared, Jean said. It means doing what needs to be done even when you're terrified. You did that. You protected our daughter. You survived. You're stronger than you know. We both are, Elena said, reaching up to touch Nari's tiny hand. Stronger together than apart. Jean kissed Elena's forehead, then Nari's. Stronger together, he agreed. Always. We're reaching the end of this powerful story, but before we wrap up, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Click the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload new content. We have more incredible stories coming your way. Over the next few days, a rhythm developed. Elena recovered slowly, her body healing from the trauma of birth and assault. Nari ate and slept and made tiny sounds that had both parents rushing to check on her. Jean barely left the hospital, conducting business from Elena's room, making calls and signing documents while his daughter slept against his chest. Detective Park returned with updates. The investigation into Siomire had revealed a pattern of cruelty towards certain patients, usually foreign women, usually those married to wealthy or powerful men. Other complaints had been filed over the years but dismissed or ignored. Now those complaints would be investigated properly. She'll face serious charges, Detective Park told Jean during one visit. Multiple counts of assault. abuse of authority, possibly more. Her nursing license will be permanently revoked. And her husband? Jean asked. That's interesting, Park said. We looked into his case. The embezzlement charges were legitimate, but we found evidence that he'd been taking money because his wife was pressuring him to match your lifestyle. She resented you and your family so much that she drove her husband to crime trying to compete. So the grudge created the situation she blamed me for, Jean observed. Ironic, isn't it? She destroyed her own life and then blamed you for the destruction. After Park left, Jean sat with Elena and told her everything. She listened quietly, holding Nari, her expression thoughtful. I feel sorry for her, Elena finally said. I know I shouldn't, but I do. Imagine being so consumed by bitterness that you destroy everything you touch. You're kinder than I am, Jean said. I just want to make sure she never hurts anyone again. That's not unkind, Elena said. That's justice. There's a difference. On the 5th day, they were finally cleared to go home. Jean had arranged for a special car seat, for their driver to take the smoothest route possible, for their home to be prepared with everything they could possibly need. He'd also arranged for around-the-clock private nursing care for the first few weeks, just in case. You're going to be an overprotective father, aren't you? Elena teased as they prepared to leave. Absolutely, Jean said without shame. I'm going to embarrass her at school and intimidate every boy who looks at her and probably need therapy when she becomes a teenager. But she'll be safe and loved, and that's what matters. As long as you know what you're in for, Elena laughed. Suyun came to say goodbye, bringing a hand-knitted blanket for Nari. Use this for her first winter, she said, draping it gently over the baby. And remember, being a parent is hard. You'll make mistakes. You'll doubt yourselves. But as long as you love her and each other, you'll figure it out. Thank you, Elena said, hugging the older woman, for everything, for believing me, for taking care of us. It was my honor, Suyun said. Now go home, start your life as a family, and come back to visit when Nari is older. I want to see what kind of remarkable woman she becomes. The ride home was slow and careful. Jean held Elena's hand while she held Nari, both of them quiet, processing everything that had happened. When they pulled up to their home, Jean saw that his staff had decorated the entrance with subtle, elegant flowers, Elena's favorite kind. Welcome home, he said softly. All of us, together. That night, after Nari was settled in her nursery, after Elena was resting comfortably, Jean stood on their balcony looking out at the city. His phone buzzed with messages about business, about the situation with Jae-sung that he'd walked away from, about a dozen other crises that demanded his attention. He ignored them all. Instead, he thought about his daughter sleeping peacefully in the next room, about his wife who had shown him what real strength looked like, about the changes he was going to make, not just in one hospital but in his entire approach to life. The darkness of his world hadn't disappeared. It was still there, waiting, full of violence and moral compromise and difficult choices. But now there was light too, a small, perfect light that depended on him to protect it, to nurture it, to make sure it could grow without being consumed by the shadows. Jean could do that. He would do that, whatever it took. Daddy's here, he whispered into the night, making a promise to a daughter who couldn't hear him but who would spend a lifetime learning what it meant. And I'm going to make sure you grow up in a world that's worthy of you. Inside, Elena appeared at the balcony door, wrapped in a robe, smiling despite her exhaustion. Come back inside, she said gently. Come be with your family. And Jean did, because that was where he belonged. Not out in the darkness making deals and threats and compromises, but here in the light with the people who had transformed him from someone who inspired fear into someone capable of love. The mafia boss who had built an empire on power and intimidation had finally found something more valuable than fear. He'd found a reason to be better, a reason to change. a reason to believe that redemption was possible. And it all started with a slap that echoed through a hospital room, a woman brave enough to survive, and a man who finally understood what was worth fighting for. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it moved you, please hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire, challenge, and transform. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Until next time, remember that real strength isn't about power. It's about protecting those who need protecting, fighting for justice, and having the courage to change. See you in the next story.